Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has signed an executive order challenging liability protections on the internet. He tweeted, and I quote, "This will be a big day for social media and fairness," end quote. This comes after Twitter called two of his tweets potentially misleading, and the executive order seeks to curtail the power of large social media platforms by trying to reinterpret a critical 1996 law which shields websites and tech companies from lawsuits. That order argues the protections hinge mainly on tech platforms operating in, quote, good faith, and that social media companies have not.
Another quote, "We're here today to defend free speech from one of the greatest dangers," end quote. Those were the words of President Trump as he signed the order.
And right now, our legal experts are raising serious doubts about the proposal and whether or not it could survive judicial scrutiny.
Here to discuss this possible change to a federal law is Dr. Laura McNeal, BNC's chief legal analyst. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
Well, let me ask you this. How will the president's executive order impact social meder companies?
Well, Fred, it's a very big if it will actually impact social media companies. I mean, the reality is this executive order is a complete overreach of the president's executive power. Essentially, what he's aiming to do is to require federal agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, to remove the immunity shield from liability that these social media companies have, which is ridiculous for him to ask them to do that. One of the primary purposes of social media platforms is to distribute information. They don't publish information, and it's well established in our judicial system that distributors of information cannot be held liable for things such as defamation of character. But someone like the New York Times, the Washington Post, those are publishers of information, and likewise they can be held liable for things like defamation because they're held to a higher standard. And so I say a really big if this executive order actually is implemented the way he hopes it will be.
Well, some legal analysts say that Trump's executive order will actually work against his best interest. What are your thoughts on that?
I have to be honest with you. I so wish I could make a call to the president and say, what are you doing? Absolutely, it can work against his interest because the section that he wants these federal agencies to reinterpret is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And essentially, this is the very section that has given President Trump the broad freedom he's had to tweet as he so pleases because, again, that's what provides the legal shield, or rather the liability shield, for these platforms. So essentially, if what he wants to happen in this executive order is implemented, now these social media companies such as Twitter and Google and Facebook will have to play basically message police. They'll have to police the very messages that Trump has had the freedom to tweet ever since his candidacy.
Case of having your cake and eating it too, I guess. But how long will it take for us to see restrictions, if they're empowered, to social media companies as a result of the president's executive order?
Because it's very well established in the legal field that this executive order that President Trump is attempting to put forth is not going to survive judicial scrutiny, meaning there are going to be legal challenges to it. It's highly unlikely we'll see any changes anytime soon. And another important thing to point out is these are just recommendations he's making to these federal agencies to change the interpretation of Section 230. They are independent agencies. They are not mandated to follow Trump's executive order. Again, they're just suggestions. And so I think this is one of those instances where his bark might be bigger than the actual bite.
Well, lots of people of color receive their news from social media outlets. Will this order impact the information that's received through these platforms?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Laverne. So many of my family members rely on Facebook, Twitter. It's the first thing they go to when they wake up in the morning for news. And so if President Trump's executive order is implemented the way that he wishes it to be, it would severely limit the content that is provided on those websites. And so Twitter would have to, again, because they're having to censor in order to protect themselves for potential liability, it's going to drastically reduce the amount of information on those sites, which of course is not what we want to see happen. We want these social media sites to continue to be marketplaces of ideas that are freely exchanged and flowing.
All right, Dr. Laura McNeal, thank you so much for your insights. As always, we will chat with you again soon.
Looking forward to it.